Face it, shaker bottles suck. Your protein shake always comes out clumpy and you look like an idiot using the thing. That's why I decided to ditch my shaker bottle for good and get myself a BlendJet 2 portable blender. It makes perfectly blended protein shakes that come out smooth, creamy, and delicious in just 20 seconds. So go to BlendJet.com and use promo code DCASTPOD at checkout to get 12% off your order. That's promo code DCASTPOD to get 12% off your order at checkout.
Have you ever wanted to learn a new language, but just didn't have the time or money? I may have a solution for you. Her name is Jessica, and she gives free Chinese lessons daily at 11 p.m. Beijing time and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Chinese is fun and easy if you have the right teacher. Let Jessica be that teacher and introduce yourself to the fastest growing language in the international job market today at tinyurl.com/tcjessica and tell her Ian sent you.
Hello and welcome to the Deathcast. I'm your host, author, and journalist Ian Tott, and I'd like to thank you for joining me as we prepare to take our 8th look into the West Memphis 3. Before we get going, I have the normal show notes. If you'd like to support the show, there's a few ways you can do this. First and foremost, you can go to your favorite podcast app, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. Secondly, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/thedeathcast, make a one-time donation to the show. And lastly, you can go to tinyurl.com/dcastpatreon for as little as $2 a month. You can get early ad-free shows, exclusive content, and help support your Deathcast. We haven't done this one in a while, but we got another 1-star review. This one is from a West Memphis 3 supporter, and I say this because I know exactly who this person is, as they were looking for podcast recommendations, and then decided to go and leave me a scathing review on multiple sites, as well as message me. So, it reads, I tried. I always give new podcasts at least a 3-episode listen. I suffered through 3 of these and it was rough. I like the host's voice. I like his way of telling the story, but I feel like he misses the big point and focuses on details that really don't matter, coming to conclusions that are just off. Also should do a little more research on subjects he thinks he knows. I found more than a few things stated as fact that are actually just wrong. Actually, Nancy, you're full of shit. I could go off on a long rant and read your rambling letter to me where you attempted to dispute all of the facts I have presented this case, but all you did was parrot the things that Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskellie have said, either themselves or through their lawyers. But I'm going to take the high ground and simply say, fuck off! You're an idiot who has never researched a case, has never worked as a private investigator, has never done any sort of investigating yourself. You simply parrot what you find online that fits your worldview. A worldview, I might add, which is not supported in any way, shape, or form by facts. Alright, now that that is out of the way, find yourself a nice comfy chair, kick back, relax. I've got my coffee, I've got my cigarettes. Let's go into the crypt. We spent last week discussing the first 2 of Jessie Misskellie's many confessions and left off talking about how, as it dawned on him that I might have, should have, not have said that, he started attempting to backpedal. This was helped greatly by his friends and family, who came out and tried to say that he was home all evening and later that he had been out wrestling. That during this wrestling match where he and a group of friends rented a professional wrestling ring in order to try and learn how to be wrestlers, Jesse's head was ran into the steel post in the corner. And not in a worked way, but in a legitimate way. And as anybody who's listened to this show for any period of time knows, I make no bones about the fact that I am a major old school wrestling fan. And I can tell you, from having witnessed it with my own two eyes on multiple occasions, had Jessie Misskellie gone to throw his head into the ring posts and accidentally, legitimately hit it, everybody would have known about it. Because these ring posts are not forgiving. They are hollow steel tubes, and they will bust your face open very easily. There is plenty of footage of trained professionals doing this and messing up and injuring themselves. So to think that a 5'1", 17-year-old did this and walked away with not even a goose egg is preposterous. Now, there is some evidence that Jesse and his friends attempted to present in regards to this supposed wrestling match, which was a receipt for the rental of the ring. Here's the problem with that. It wasn't dated for May 5th. Jesse even began to work this supposed alibi into his later confessions, stating that he did go wrestling that night, but it wasn't until after the murders had taken place. I want to put this in context. So on June 3rd, Jesse confesses. All three of them are arrested. He sends a letter from jail to his family stating, "Y'all know I wasn't doing this. I was wrestling that night." His father and living girlfriend tell conflicting stories, with one stating that he was at home all day on the day of the murders, and the other stating that he was out roofing that day on the day of the murders. The living girlfriend said that she could prove that Jesse was working all that day and could not possibly have participated in these crimes, although unfortunately for Jesse, she was never able to do so. So now, somewhere between July and September, October of 1993, Jessie Misskellie confesses again. And it wasn't like he confessed to, his lawyers or somebody who could dispute that this took place. He confesses to law enforcement. They audio tape it. So he's telling his family one thing after the initial confession. Then he's saying, I didn't do it. But then he confesses again. And then goes back into this whole, I didn't do it. Any psychologist will tell you that that is the sign of a guilty conscience. To routinely state something, say you didn't, and then go back to saying it over and over again, says that Jessie Misskellie had something on his mind concerning these murders that was eating at him, and that he needed to get it out. It's not hyperbole, that's fact. There's some supporters who say, no, Jesse only continued to do these confessions because he was being coached by law enforcement. That is actually factually untrue, as we're going to see after we get through the trials, and Jesse still can't keep his damn mouth shut. These same supporters, many of them will say that Jesse thought by doing so, he would please the law enforcement and that they would go easier on him or just let him go. We already know that Jesse understood what he did was wrong. He understood right from wrong. He understood what the law was and why it existed, as he had been in trouble with the law multiple times already. So this idea that if Jesse was thinking that if he just confessed and kept confessing, it would make the law lay off of him is absolute fallacy, because he already knew from his past experiences with the law that they would not go easy on him for the things that he had done. He understood that there was consequences, and that what they had done was much bigger than just beating some kid up. Just as he understood that they weren't going to go easy on him or let him go because he confessed. I'm going to touch on this quickly because there's a bullshit Twitter account out there, West Memphis 3 Facts, that likes to say, the police coerced him and the DA offered him a deal. No, they didn't. I have read the transcripts. I have heard the only available audio of that confession, as garbled as it was. And one of the absolute first things that is stated by the district attorney's office is when they ask Jesse that he understands he is not going to get any sort of deal from doing this, and that he is doing so against the best wishes of his lawyer. And Jesse answers yes to both, meaning he did this of his own free will and own volition, with the understanding that he would not be rewarded for doing this. And these are the same people who say, oh, there's so many things going on in the background you don't know about. Bullshit. The only thing that's going on in the background is a feud between Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin, because Jason Baldwin realized that Damien Echols is as big a scumbag as everybody's been saying he was for the last 30 years. And Damien Echols is trying to keep his name in print by coming out with baseless claims on a case that the state of Arkansas considers closed. But we'll get into that later. So now we've got Jesse spinning these tales about how he went wrestling, and people bringing forward receipts for going wrestling on dates that don't match up to when the murders took place. He also starts stating that there was a situation that took place at the trailer park on the night of the murders where someone hit someone else's child, and he became involved in it. Even to his own lawyers, Jesse was giving conflicting statements. On September 24th, 1993, Dan Stidham, who was his lawyer, filed a memo which states, spoke with Jesse today via telephone. Ari, why he tells his dad he wasn't at crime scene and why he tells us he was. Jesse also in this memo states that his brain is fried from huffing gas, which he has been doing for 2 years. Stidham also notes that, according to Jesse, the police started yelling at him and it, quote, got his nerves all messed up. They told him what to say and he said it on the tape. In this memo from Stidham, Jesse gives a rundown of his day, that he was woken up by his father at 9 a.m. because Ricky Dees was picking him up for work. He, Dees, and John Darby roofed from 9 to noon at a house in West Memphis from noon to 1. Lunch at home with Dad. 1 to 6 p.m. roofed house in West Memphis with Ricky and John. They dropped him off at 6:30 at home. He talked with Lee Rush at 6:30, and then from 6:30 to 7:15 walked down to Stephanie's house. She wasn't home. Police pulled up in driveway, said someone had assaulted Stephanie's son. Jesse told police that Steph was not home, walked down to his aunt's house, seen Johnny Hamilton on way there, went home, and then left for Dyes. 7:15 to 11 p.m. left home with Johnny Hamilton, Freddie Revell, Dennis Carter, and one of Freddie's friends. This version was not corroborated by anyone who Jesse claimed to have had contact with. Later, when talking to his police, he would claim that he made a lot of the things that he told them up, particularly concerning occult practices. The problem with that is Jesse came forward with this information to the police, and the police were told this information by other independent witnesses who were members of this cult. Most of them, but not all, regretted being involved in it, but all of them gave very similar accounts of this group's activities. Again, completely independent of Misskellie. And to the best of my knowledge, from everything I have seen in this case, not a single one of them has ever recanted those statements to the police. Misskellie claimed with a doctor that he told the police what he had done that day, and they had basically discounted it, not even making any mention of it in their notes. Now, in order to believe that Misskellie told officers this, you have to believe a few things. A, that the entire West Memphis Police Department was massively corrupt and was going to try and railroad these 3 kids who came from the lower economic end of the stick. And also that they lied and perjured themselves in court. I'm not saying that all police officers are, the bastions of their oath of office. What I am saying, however, is that it is absolutely preposterous to believe that the entire West Memphis Police Department, aided by numerous other agencies, railroaded these 3 young men into life sentences and a death sentence, and that these 3 young men have never been able to present any single shred of evidence in court. These people that, oh no, Jesse had an alibi and it stood up, and Jason had an alibi and it stood up, and Damien had an alibi and it stood up. No, not a single one of them has ever had an alibi that stood up in court. Jessie Misskelle's alibi was shredded in court. Jason Baldwin never gave an alibi, and he has not to this day. And every single alibi that Damien Echols has presented from the day that he was arrested has been destroyed. Watching TV at a family friend's house was shot down in court. Talking to girls on the phone all night was shot down in court. And those are the only 2 alibis that he's ever given. Yet people still believe the lie. You don't have to believe me. Go and look at the court records yourself. They are available. They paint a much different picture of what actually happened than the West Memphis 3 and their camp and the god-awful books and movies that have been made about this case portray. All of this goes going on. Jason and Damien are protesting their innocence. Jesse is kind of wishy-washy about it. He didn't do it. He did it. He didn't do it. Private investigators going around threatening witnesses, intimidating them, getting them to recant their stories. And the judge decides that all of these kids are going to be tried in 2 different trials. Misskelle's going to be tried by himself. Baldwin and Echols, who are the masterminds and driving force behind these crimes, are going to be tried together. He also granted motions for a change of venue, with Misskellie being moved to Clay County and Baldwin Echols being moved to Jonesboro, Arkansas. Jury selection in Misskelle's trial began on January 19th, 1994. From the outset, Misskelle's friends and family tried to put forward a defense for him, namely that Jesse, A, was not capable of committing these acts, but B, he had alibis. Unfortunately for the accused, however, none of these alibis panned out. Misskelle's father stated that he had left work at 5:30 to head over to his DUI class. The reason for this is they wanted him to pay the money for the class in advance. Misskellie Sr. drove over to this class, and that he returned to the trailer around 7, speaking with his son at roughly 7:15, before Jesse is supposed to have gone and participated in this wrestling training. Others, including Stephanie Dollar, gave witness statements saying that at the supposed times of the murders, Misskellie was actually in the trailer park. If you remember from other episodes, I discussed how there was an altercation in the trailer park where someone smacked another person's child. This was Stephanie Dollar's son. And they claimed that Misskellie was not only there, but he had also interacted with the police. And if you believe their version of events, Misskellie was really interjecting himself into the middle of this situation. However, all of the officers involved in this situation knew Misskellie on sight. Remember, this kid did not have a good reputation around town. And all of them testified that Misskellie was not on scene during the time of this altercation. Now, if you're a supporter of the West Memphis 3,
we're going to have to believe that there was a gigantic conspiracy involving the West Memphis Police Department, but also really the entire criminal justice system of both the state of Arkansas as well as branches of the federal government who got involved and helped investigate this thing. And I know, the people who support these scumbags, they don't want to go out on that limb because conspiracy theories never happen except for when it supports their cause. Then it's not a conspiracy, it's bona fide fact despite there being no fact to support their assertions. These types of people are the same type who don't believe that there's a possibility that Timothy McVeigh may have acted in concert with other individuals during the Oklahoma City bombing, or that JFK may have had a conspiracy against him in order to cause his death via assassination. They lump that idea of a conspiracy theory into the new meaning of it, which is basically anything that is right-wing and batshit crazy, like the whole QAnon phenomenon, which I wholeheartedly agree has no basis in reality that is provable, and therefore I avoid topics such as that on this show. But the hypocrisy does need to be pointed out. A conspiracy is an event wherein one or more parties conspire together to achieve a specific goal. The theory aspect comes in is that oftentimes, whether there is fact and data to support a thing, it is nearly impossible to prove that it actually occurred. Doesn't have to be something wild and outlandish like we hear in the news today. It can be something as simple as employer A conspired with one of his employees to get another employee to quit their job, and they did this by making that job miserable for that individual to the point that they felt they had no other choice but to quit. That is a conspiracy. A conspiracy from contemporary American culture that has been proven but was thought to not exist for many years is the MK-Ultra experiments conducted by the CIA, wherein they, with various members of the medical community, undertook experimentation on individuals using LSD and other underhanded tactics in order to see if they could break an individual, control them, or reprogram them. For many years that was thought to be a made-up story until the congressional hearings of the mid-1970s, where it came out that yes, these things actually did happen. At that point it was no longer a conspiracy theory, it was fact. Another conspiracy theory from somewhat contemporary times is the entire Iran-Contra. This stuff was going around Washington, D.C., and people were saying that the Reagan administration was involved in arming the Contras in Iran. While the government said that this is not true, we do not deal or broker with terrorists. As anybody who lived through it can tell you, eventually it did come out that not only did our government do this, they had to admit it under oath. If you remember, Ollie North was heavily involved in this, and Reagan basically had to eat crow and slink before the American public and admit that he had been involved in it. So that's what a real conspiracy theory is, and that's what these individuals don't seem to grasp. You can't have it one way. Either conspiracies exist or they do not. My personal opinion, having done massive amounts of research on this case, spoken to members of law enforcement as well as individuals who were intricately tied to this case, is that there was no conspiracy by the West Memphis Police Department, the state of Arkansas, or members of our federal government to convict these three lonely young men of a heinous crime for which they did not commit. Could the case of the state against Misskellie and company have been stronger? Certainly. If you ask any prosecutor, with very few exceptions, they will tell you the exact same thing, that the case they are presenting could almost certainly always have been stronger. However, in this country, you have a right to a speedy trial. And once a judge sets a trial date, the prosecution as well as the defense has to hurry to catch up in order to make certain that their side is prepared to try this thing in court. I wholeheartedly believe that had the judge in the Misskellie case said we're going to go to trial for this midsummer of 1994, the prosecution would have been able to get a much stronger case together to present to the jury, one which I believe would have left no doubt in anyone's minds as to the guilt of these men. They were unable to do all of that, however, because of the law stating you have the right to a speedy trial, and because Ron Lax, who attached himself to the defense team, was going around and basically coercing and threatening individuals to recant their testimony in an effort to severely hamper the prosecution's case. That's not speculation or guessing on my part. We have documentation saying that this stuff has happened, and in fact, the judge in one of the trials actually lambasted Lax for these tactics. It is fairly common in criminal trials for someone from the defense, not always with the defense's foreknowledge, but for someone speaking on behalf of the defense to try and go and sway witness testimony. That's just the way that our court system works. That is not to say that every statement that the police received prior to and after the arrest of Misskellie, Eccles, and Baldwin would have stood up beneath close scrutiny in court had the court decided that they were going to sequester all witnesses prior to the trial taking place. I firmly believe that individuals such as Aaron Hutchinson, with his wildly unbelievable stories, would have been quickly found to have been making things up in order to tell the police a better story. Possibly at the coaching of his mother, we don't know that for certain. There are others, such as the young man that Misskellie gave his blood-splattered shoes to, who were in fear of the prosecution and the defense team because he knew they were out there trying to get him in order to get him to talk in court, and he feared this. I think that gives a pretty good indication as to the tactics that both sides were using going into court in order to make certain that witness testimony matched witness statements. Or in the case of the defense, that witness testimony did not take place, or if it did not match what police had been told prior to the person arriving in court that day. These are very basic tactics of a trial. Back to the supposed alibis of Misskellie, however, the story of Stephanie Dollar and numerous others is that a woman had assaulted her child and the police had been called. After the police had left, two men got into it and the police were again called. All of the individuals who were testifying on Jessie's behalf stated that Jessie was there, was interjecting himself into this entire situation. Again, the officers who knew Jessie Misskellie could not place him at the scene. Jessie's father testified that his son left around 7:30 in order to travel to Diaz, Arkansas, where he was going to practice wrestling, while admitting that he did not see Jessie and the other boys actually leave. When questioned as to whether or not it was a possibility that Jessie Jr. may have been on the scene, Jessie Sr. stated,
I don't believe he did it because, yeah, he could have been with them, but he did not have anything to do with it, I don't believe. Further explaining that he had done his own investigation of this case. Quoted at one point as saying that he was not there. I didn't have proof or anything. I said he may have been there. I do not know. I said, but if he was there, he didn't have anything to do with killing those boys. So there we have Jesse's father damaging his own credibility on the stand, but further, the woman who ran the DWI class that he was attending punched some holes in his story, stating that the class usually ended between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. She even had a sign-up sheet showing that Misskellie had attended on that date. The woman further went on to state that on the evening of the 5th, she was being evaluated, and the class actually ran to roughly 7:45. So now we have a 45-minute discrepancy in the time that Misskellie says he got home and the time that his teacher is saying that he could possibly have gotten home. Now, I don't know the exact distance between where this class was and where the Misskellie's trailer was, but I do have to believe it would have taken him more than a few minutes to get back over there, which means the earliest point he may have seen his son is somewhere in the, say, 7:55 to 8 o'clock mark, which again is very far off of what he stated while under oath. And again, this is something, too, that supporters will try and point to when they're saying that there's a conspiracy against the accused, that this DWI instructor was lying under oath or may in fact have fudged things in order to make it appear that Misskellie Sr. was at the class later than he actually was. Unfortunately for the defense, others stated that this was in fact the case. So in order for this conspiracy to be true, you're going to have the police going out and persuading individuals that attended this class that they needed to lie about the time that they got out. Something else I'd like to point out very quickly, and that's just because I found this while preparing for this week's episode, is the famouscases.com website on the trials of the West Memphis 3. On their website, it states that the police informed Misskellie that there was a $35,000 reward leading to information that led to the arrest of the West Memphis 3. And the reason I'm pointing this out is I have encountered a number of true crime podcasters who use that website as one of their source materials. They also state on the website that after many hours of brutal questioning, Misskellie was coerced into giving a confession. Both of those statements, as I have already pointed out in other episodes, are untrue. The police never informed Misskellie that there was a $35,000 reward leading to the arrest of the individuals responsible for this crime. Nor did Misskellie go through many hours of brutal questioning. We have established the time frame during which Jessie Misskellie was questioned by the police as well as given polygraph exams. It started at roughly 10:15 in the morning and went until early afternoon, at which point Misskellie failed his polygraph examination and then began telling the police the truth in dribs and drabs. And I'm throwing this out there because I know, having seen the emails that I have been getting and the comments I've been getting online from supporters, that they're going to try and throw this in my face when I'm discussing all of this. Unfortunately for them, there is no evidence to back up the veracity of your claims. However, there is a mountain of evidence, documented evidence, that disproves that particular piece of your argument. Back to the trial, numerous individuals that testified for Misskellie, such as the roofer he is supposed to have worked with that day,
were unable to give statements consistent with those that they initially gave to police. Initially, this roofer stated that he didn't believe he had seen Misskellie until 9 p.m. the previous night, and that he did not work late that evening. However, he flip-flopped in court, changing times and giving contradictory statements about what actually took place. On June 17th, he stated, Misskellie's with me until 2:30 roofing, and when we got off from roofing, Jessie went home and had 2 sandwiches, then went to see his girlfriend, and after that I didn't see him until later, about 5:30. He came over. When he left, I didn't see him until the next day. He was over at my house for about 15 minutes. As far as Jessie being a devil worshipper, I never did know anything about, and I've been knowing Jessie almost all my life. This contractor stated a few days after this, on the 18th, that Misskellie had been with him until about 1:30, and then afterwards he went home until about 3:30, and then he had seen Jessie and his girlfriend after this point for a little bit at a bus station, and that Jessie was over at his house at roughly 5:30 and stayed for about 15 minutes. On the stand, he stated that they had begun working at roughly 9 a.m. and worked until 12:30 or 1. Part of his testimony, we went back to Highland. Ricky dropped us off at Jessie's house. Jessie said he was going to go get him something to eat. After that, I went home, and Jessie said he was going back down to Stephanie's house.
Further states that he saw Jessie with his girlfriend at that point around 4 p.m. Jessie came down to my house after he got to talk to his girlfriend. He stayed at my house for about 15 or 20 minutes, and he said he was going to his house. This was the last time I seen him. Not major discrepancies in what he gave police on the 2 times that he came in to speak to them. However, he's flip-flopping on the time that he and Jessie actually finished work. This is important because there are those who testified that Jessie had worked until 5 or 5:30 that evening, but right here we have someone who has admitted to knowing Jessie their entire life, stating that they did not work that long that day. Ricky Dees, who was the actual owner of the contracting company, stated in police statements that he had known Misskellie for 8 or 9 years. He had never known Misskellie to have a full-time job during that period, which is understandable given the fact that Jessie was only 17 when these crimes occurred, and that on Tuesday the 4th and Wednesday the 5th, Jessie had worked with him doing roofing until 12:30. Dees changed his story when he was on the stand, stating that he'd actually used Jessie all day on the 4th, but only until around 1 p.m. on the 5th. That could be explained away as a simply he was paying Jessie under the table and didn't want to admit to having been paying someone under the table for as long as he was. But it does point to the fact that Misskellie only worked until somewhere between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. Jessie's 14-year-old girlfriend stated that she got off the school bus at roughly 3:30 and met Jessie. They went over to the Dollar household where they watched her children until roughly 4 o'clock, after which they walked to someone else's house where they stayed for about an hour, leaving at roughly 5:30, as this is when the situation involving the Dollar child happened, and that the 2 of them had actually split up at about 6:30 because Jessie informed her he was going to go wrestling. But then she says that Jessie showed up at the Dollar house around 7-ish with his wrestling mask. All the children wanted to wear it, and that Jessie actually left between 7:10 and 7:20. Right here, she's contradicting everything that Jessie Misskellie Sr. has said. This young girl also admitted that after the arrests, she had spoken with Stephanie Dollar, Johnny Hamilton, and Fred Ravelli, stating that they had discussed where Jessie had been that evening, and that it was Stephanie Dollar who had reminded her about the situation involving the police on that night.
Stephanie Dollar basically said under oath that she saw Jessie Misskellie as basically a good kid and gave no indications that she should not allow him around her home or around her children, that Jessie babysat for her 4 to 5 times a week. She did admit that she had seen Jessie Misskellie associate with Jason Baldwin when she had lived out at Lakeshore a year prior. She also stated that she believed Jason Baldwin was a nice young man who said things like yes ma'am and no ma'am and yes sir and no sir. About the events on May 5th, Dollar stated, all I know is that I seen him at 6:30 down here at the corner where the first street you can come into down at the stop sign over there. I seen him right there up in that area. He's standing by a police car. I had a report. I had to go get my report so I could remember I worked that day because I wasn't sure it was that day. I knew I had seen him that day, but I wasn't for sure. So I went up Marion Sheriff's Office and I got my report, and on it, it says 5/5/93. It says what time the call was made and what time the police officer arrived, and it was 6:30. An incident had happened where a lady had slapped my little boys, the reason I had to call the police in the first place. She did admit that she did not know the time that the boys were murdered, that after reading things in the newspaper, she felt certain that she had seen Jessie during the time that these crimes had taken place, which I can't fault her for saying and admitting that. There is nothing wrong with trying to help and protect your friends. However, when presented with facts that contradicted what it was she was saying, such as, the officers stating that Misskellie had not been there, Dollar did not back down. She did state, though, that she did not know what he had done after all the incidents with the police were over with, other than she believed he may have gone wrestling. Numerous other people also attempted to place Misskellie at the scene of this entire thing, which again, going off of the police reports as well as the testimony of the officers who responded, was not the case. Jessie Misskellie was not there. The individuals who came forward for Misskellie were all his friends and were all trying to give him an alibi to contradict the statements that he himself had given to police of his own free will. Many of these individuals, when questioned on the stand, were noted to be wearing yellow ribbons, and when asked about these ribbons, stated openly that they were to show a sign of support and solidarity for Jessie Misskellie. Not the type of thing any defense lawyer worth their salt wants their witnesses doing and stating on the stand. If Jessie's lawyers had had the wherewithal, they would have asked every one of the supporters who was wearing one of these yellow ribbons to remove it before getting on the stand, as that will paint a picture for the jury that the individual speaking is going to say whatever it is that they can in order to help that individual get off. It's called witness bias, and many of the people in this case and in other cases suffer from it. As opposed to telling things as they recall them, they will alter the facts of what they were saying in order to make it fit the story that the defense team is trying to present to the jury and the court. They had further testimony from people trying to give Jessie an alibi, as well as individuals stating how Vicky Hutchinson came to be involved in the picture. Basically, that Vicky Hutchinson randomly wanted to get to know Damien Eccles. Many of these witnesses would state that they had seen individuals leaving for Dyes, Arkansas to go wrestling, and that this crystallized in their mind that it was May 5th. That is important to remember because, as we're going to see when we get to the testimony of the individual who actually rented the ring, May 5th was not the day they went wrestling. Something else that is important to note before we get to the entire ridiculous idea of the wrestling training is that many of the people who Misskellie had testified for him were brought up in what has become known as the Bible Confession. And Misskellie either agreed that he had spoken to the individuals, however, it was in the context of having committed the murders, or stating that the things that these individuals stated in open court had happened, but not on the 5th. It was a different day. And we are going to be getting to the Bible confession, not this episode, the next one. There were also individuals who stated that they were with Misskellie on the date of the 5th that never mentioned this to the police prior to the trial, which casts their testimony into doubt. Some of these individuals also gave statements to police that they had witnessed Misskellie drinking, his father and his father's girlfriend drinking, and Misskellie doing drugs, including huffing gasoline. Now we're going to be talking about the supposed wrestling alibi. This first section comes from Keith Ravelli. Quote, "We all met at Kevin's house. Every time we went, we'd all meet there because that was the central area where everyone lived that went with us, and he was there. He rode with us that night. We met Keith at the old Exxon station on Highway 63. I believe I was starting to get dark. At first, in my first statement, I said it was about 5 or 5:30, but it was getting dark when we left." This contradicts what Ravelli stated at another point where he said it was around 7 o'clock that they picked Jessie up, stating that they went there, got a receipt, and wrestled until 11:30. During his testimony, Ravelli stated that he gave the $300 deposit to the man who owned the ring, and that he knows that it was the 5th because the man told him that the next day he had gone to the bank and made the deposit, and that the deposit was May 6th. However, the prosecution produced documents showing that this $300 deposit actually occurred on April 27th, which was the Wednesday prior to the 5th. They did this by showing the depositor's slip as well as the receipt that the man who owned the ring had written for the men. When questioned about this, Ravelli admitted that the prosecution was right and that he had his days incorrect, before going on to state that he had in fact gone out of his way to try and find evidence that Misskellie had been with them on May 5th. Again, this is not something that I can blame any of them for. They're trying to save their friend from going to jail for the rest of his life for a crime that they don't believe he committed. The only issue I have with any of these testimonies is that these individuals continue to cling to these stories despite the fact that the prosecution was able to show them time and again that the things that they were stating were not factually correct and could not be correct. Again, that is witness bias, meaning that basically these individuals put blinders on in order to ignore everything that was being presented to them so that they could continue to tell the story that they were passing off as factual in an effort to get their friend acquitted. This is not a phenomena that is unique to this case, though. Also, it was found that on the night of the 5th, there was no wrestling training scheduled. From these various testimonies, we get the story of Misskellie getting thrown either into the ring post or into the side of the ring and sporting a massive goose egg after this fact. However, there is no photographic evidence, nor has anyone come forward and factually been able to say that they had seen Jessie Misskellie sporting this goose egg. I talked about it in other episodes. I'm going to throw it out here. If he had gotten thrown headfirst into that ring post or even into the side of the ring, it would have been known. There wouldn't have been a goose egg unless he just simply bumped his head off of it. From all accounts, he hit his head pretty hard. And having been around wrestling rings many times, Jessie Misskellie, had he gone into either one of those unprotected, would almost certainly have busted himself wide open. Might look phony on TV, but especially back in 1993, I can promise you that the body of the ring was either made out of steel or wood, and the support posts in the corner where your rope's attached to was absolutely made of steel. And that even if it was what they called a spot show ring, which is just a smaller ring that's easily transported around, Jessie Misskellie would have had visible injuries after the 5th to indicate that he had gotten hurt while they were practicing. It also came out during trial that Vicky Hutchinson had bought whiskey for Jessie Misskellie and another individual on the afternoon of the 5th prior to the murders. Keep that in your hat for when we discuss the Bible confession next episode. It does play an important part in this. After a 7-day trial, Jessie Misskelly's case went before the jury on the afternoon of February 3rd. The jury deliberated the next day for roughly 2.5 hours before reaching a decision. Jessie was found guilty of first-degree murder in the murder of Michael Moore and second-degree murder in the deaths of both Stevie Branch and Christopher Byers. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 2 20-year sentences. On February 4th, Misskellie was transferred to state prison, and according to the 2 guards that transferred Misskellie, he spoke to them freely about his involvement in the murders. This has always been a bone of contention for supporters, but also those of us who believe that the trio were in fact guilty. There's no way to know whether or not Jessie Misskellie was coerced into giving the statements that he gave to these officers, or in fact if he had given any statements to them at all. We don't have a written transcript, we don't have a tape recording of it, all we have is what the officers reported when they returned. I'm going to quote the report that was sent to Gary Gitchell. The following statement is a narrative as told to Deputy James Lindy and myself. The statement is not a chronological order as it was given by Jessie, but has been put in order to the best of our ability with knowledge of your case. Your department may have knowledge of this in its entirety. If not, maybe it will provide a little insight as to what took place on May 5th, 1993. Jail Incident Report. On the afternoon of February 4th, 1994, Deputy James Lindsay and myself were transporting Jessie Misskellie to the Arkansas Department of Corrections at Pine Bluff. Jessie was asked if there was anything he wanted to say, and after being assured we could not use anything he said against him in court, he chose to talk. Jessie advised he had received a call from Jason Baldwin asking him if he wanted to go to West Memphis to get some girls. Jessie, Damien, and Jason met on a local road on May 5th, sometime that evening. Jessie claimed that he had been drinking Evelyn Williams whiskey that Mrs. Hutchinson had bought him, and Jason and Damien were drinking beer. It was also stated that they had smoked 2 marijuana joints that afternoon. Jessie said that he had known Jason Baldwin since the 6th grade, and he did not know Damien that well, but that Damien would drink human blood, remembering a time when Jason was bleeding and Damien took some of the blood with his finger and licked it off. Jessie stated that Officer Callahan had lied in court about not seeing him on May 5th. Jessie claims that he had a short conversation. After all meeting on the road, the 3 boys walked to the woods and were sitting in the water with Jason and Damien going under. Jessie said he could not go under because of his ear problems. The 3 young boys were seen from a distance when Damien told Jessie and Jason to hide. Jessie said they were hiding behind bushes when Damien grabbed Michael Moore. The 2 other young boys started hitting Damien, trying to help their friend, and that is when Jessie and Jason jumped out and helped Damien beat them. Jessie advised he helped hold them and beat them, but had no part in raping or killing them. Jessie advised 2 of the boys were raped from behind before and after they were tied up, and that Damien and Jason were taking turns with the 2 boys. Jessie said the boys were still alive at this time. Jessie said the boys were kept quiet by putting hands over their mouths, and that Jason and Damien had used shirts, and at times their face were pushed down into the ground. Jessie was asked how the boys were kept under control while being raped and not tied, and yet he stated they were like puppies. When you whoop a puppy and tell it to stay, it will. Jessie did say he had to catch Michael Moore, but did not say at what point. Jessie claims that the third boy was never raped, but he may have been the one that Damien took his penis and put in his mouth. The young boy's penis. Jessie said at one point Damien and Jason had one of the boys in a headlock, with one he believed had his penis in the boy's mouth while the other one had him from behind. Jessie said he did not mention the ears to the police, only a headlock. Jessie also mentioned that sticks had been used to beat the boys. At one point, Jessie said that Jason had a buck-type locking knife and cut it all off and threw it in the weeds, saying the boy was alive and tied at this point, and that he was surprised blood did not get on him because blood went everywhere and he was about a car length away. Jessie said they threw him into the water and he was still squirming around in the water, at which point he left. Jessie said he does not know what happened to the knife. Jessie said he believed the other two boys were not conscious when he left, but they were not in the water. Jessie also stated that Jason called him later and asked him why he left, and he told them he could not watch it any longer. He claims the only other contact with Jason and Damien was a couple of times at the skating rink, but they were mad at him. Other information. Jessie claims his lawyers asked him if he was innocent and that he had lied to them. Jessie said the boys had a clubhouse and that's why he thinks they were in the area. When talking about the meetings they had, Jessie could remember about 9 people showing up, and at one particular meeting, Kent was to bring a dog as his treat. The dog was taken away in the woods where it was killed and skinned. The dog was brought back and cooked in something that looked like Crisco in a washing machine type bucket. Jessie said he ate a little one time and got sick. Kent was to catch the dog at the trailer park, and Jessie believed they had killed about 4 dogs altogether. Jessie said Jason and Damien would both have sex with Dominique at these meetings. Jessie said he lied about the time and the rope to trick the police and to see if they were lying. Jessie says he feels the other boys tricked him into doing what he did. Jessie claims he has felt sorry for what has happened and talks as if he wants to testify against the other boys so they will not go free and to help himself. Jessie did say the photograph showed to him was a group picture of the boys riding their bicycles in front of a house. There's some things important in here, and that Misskellie stated to these officers apparently that he had willingly lied to the officers. But he also mentions doing drugs beforehand. But by and large, the story Misskellie gave these officers, assuming he actually gave this, I'm not going to say that this particular confession was something that actually happened, and that if it did happen, the police did not bully him, because we don't know what happened inside of this vehicle. But the story that they're giving in this narrative is largely consistent with the statements that Jessie Misskellie himself gave. We're going to call it at this point. I hope you have enjoyed this installment on the West Memphis 3. Next week, we are going to get into the last of the 2 known confessions by Jessie Misskellie, namely the Bible confession that he gave to his lawyer, as well as the confession that he gave to the prosecutors before the trial of Damien and Jason. Until next time, the Deathcast is a production of Corpse Creek Publishing in association with Big Pond Podcasting. Stay morbid.